Thank you, everyone. So good to be here with you. I'm so honored to be in Montreal in this beautiful community. Great. Thanks. So I am a speaker with Apologetics Canada. I'm also one of the board of directors, member of the board of directors with Apologetics Canada. So I must say it's such a privilege to partner with FIRM, such a wonderful ministry that you guys have, and thank you for having me. So I'm an apologist. Some of you may not know what that word actually means. We're not apologizing for anything. Yeah, so the word apologist comes from 1 Peter 3:16, and where Peter says we always need to give a reason or a defense for anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Now, the word that Peter uses there in the original Greek for defense actually means apologia in the original Greek. So that's where you get the term apologetics from. So let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I am from Africa, born on the east coast of Africa in a beautiful city called Durban. And before that, we have moved to Ontario. As my brother said, I am an anesthesiologist. So if you guys are asleep by the end of this talk, I will consider it a job well done. But I must warn you that I will give you an invoice after that. The only way you're not going to get an invoice is if you watched the Blue Jays game yesterday, and that you would have a good reason for falling asleep during this talk. So I watched the Blue Jays game yesterday, so I'm actually at risk of putting myself to sleep. So there we go, 1 Peter 3:15, we get an apologia. So this is a picture of Durban, South Africa, where I'm from. I now live in Hamilton, Ontario, which some of you may know is based on the Niagara Escarpment. So there's about 100 to 150 beautiful waterfalls in our area. It is called the waterfall capital of the world. So in our spare time, my family and I love to jump out of waterfalls. I am an anesthesiologist. So who is the anesthesiologist in this picture? That's the guy hiding behind the drapes by the head of the patient. The surgeon is dealing with all the blood. We with that big machine there, taking care of the patient, putting the patient to sleep, waking the patient up. That little curtain there is pretty important in terms of medical concepts. We call it the blood-brain barrier. So we are the brains, the surgeon is the blood. Sorry about that. We've been called different terms for different people. One of the commonest terms that we call milkmen in the medical terms, because we use this drug called propofol. Propofol was the drug that actually killed Michael Jackson, but it's one of our most famous and commonest used drugs, so we go by the term milkman. Just before I go, I always like starting my talks with a disclosure. And this is my disclosure. I am a Christian. I believe that Jesus is both Kyrios and Theos. That is the words of Thomas in the Gospel of John. And that translates from the original Greek, meaning Jesus is both Lord and God. And I believe, my second disclosure, that God has spoken. And if God has spoken, that changes everything. And I believe that all scripture is theos noustos, original Greek meaning God breathed. Now, the point I want to make is that I don't just believe that this is rational statements, meaning that it's logical, it makes sense of reality, and that it's defensible, meaning we can give an apologia. I also believe, despite all this, that it is true. It's not true for you or true for me, that it is objectively true. But what it can never be is a half-truth. It can never be moderately true. It can never be true for you, true for me, or relatively true. So that's my disclosure here. This morning's talk, I'm going to talk about science and faith, and I've titled the talk, Has Science Made Atheism Extinct? So this is a famous picture of my make-believe dinosaur called an atheismosaurus. And I just want to start by telling you a little story. It's a story of two Australian sailors that ported in Durban, South Africa. Durban is a port city. And so they go to a pub and they get ridiculously drunk. And it's the middle of the day. It's like 12 noon in the day. And they're ridiculously drunk. And so they stumble out of that pub not knowing where they actually are and trying to find their way back to the base. So they actually bump into their superior naval colonel. And he's dressed in all his regalia, and he's got his lapels on and his badges. And one of the sailors say to him, "Say, mate, do you know where you are?" And this colonel is clearly not impressed by this man, so he stands up and he looks down at this sailor and he says, "Do you know who I am?" At which point the sailor turns to his friend and says, "We are in a spot of bother now. We don't know where we are, and he doesn't know who he is." And that's the problem that we are facing in the world out there. People don't know who they are. That has resulted in so much of confusion out there. And the reason is that the question of identity always starts up from who you really are. And the question of who you really are is a question of origin. Who and where did I come from? And in the world today, we are bombarded by two different sets of ideas. One is atheism, or the other term for atheism is naturalism, which means that only natural things, things in nature, are the only things that exist. Or materialism. Materialism means that only matter exists. Nothing outside matter, nothing spiritual actually exists. And that basically means the idea that is being filtered to everyone is that we are basically animals. We are basically errors of an unguided natural process called evolution. We're just another animal. We're nothing but a random byproduct of time, chance, and matter. We are a cosmic accident. George Gaylord Simpson, the late Harvard paleontologist, said, "Man is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind." Richard Dawkins, he is the Archduke of modern atheism and the author of this best-selling book called The God Delusion. And he says, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, there is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares, DNA just is, and we dance to its music. How crazy a statement. But that is true for that worldview. That is absolutely true. But can you imagine telling the victims of the Rwanda genocide, oh, those people that killed your relatives, they were just dancing to their DNA? Can you imagine telling the victim of a rapist, oh, he was just dancing to his DNA? There's no such thing as good or evil. And that's exactly the point. It doesn't make sense of reality. But if you follow the logic all the way through, this is exactly what you land up with. If matter, material molecules are all that there is, I don't matter at all. And who remembers Bill Nye the Science Guy? Anyone? Bill Nye? Oh man, I still have nightmares about Bill Nye the Science Guy. He was around even when I was young. Bill Nye, famous atheist, and he gives a speech at the 2010 Humanist Award, right? And he says, and Earth really in the cosmic scheme of things is another speck, and our sun, an unremarkable star, nothing special, is another speck, and the galaxy is a speck. I am a speck on a speck, orbiting a speck, among other specks, among still other specks in the middle of specklessness. I am insignificant, I suck. That's a quote from his speech. Talk about a motivation speech. We are allowing these people access to our children? Really? You see, ideas have consequences. It affects what you believe, how you look at the world. Now, I do not do romantic films. Unfortunately, I was forced to see a romantic film. And with the problem with me and romantic films, I immediately break out in hives. It's a rare genetic condition, unfortunately. So I saw this movie called The Fault in Our Stars. It was the 2014 movie, The Fault in Our Stars. It's based on a book called by John Green. I don't know, some of you may have had the misfortune of actually watching this movie. So it's about the story of these two young teenagers, Hazel and Augustus, both with terminal cancer. And Hazel's wish is that she visits this author called Peter van Houten because his book really impacted her. So she goes and visits him, and during this time, they have a little bit of a discussion, and things get heated, and they actually have a fallout. And he turns to Hazel, who's suffering with cancer, and he says, "You are a side effect of an evolutionary process that cares little for individual lives. You are a failed experiment in mutation." I'll let that sit with you. Now, during that movie, I was fast asleep. So imagine this dog fast asleep. But the minute that was said, my ear picked up. I wish I could just pick up one ear like a dog, but literally my ear picked up. And as a doctor, I can say there's an element of truth to that. And especially if you believe in this worldview that's out there, that we are just errors, genetic errors, a cosmic accident. But also cancer is the result of a genetic mutation. But he was wrong in his statement. And the reason why he was wrong was not about the mutation. He said, nature, you are a failed experiment of nature. And he says, nature cares. Nature doesn't care. Nature doesn't have the capacity to care. And as they try and get around this, they always capitalize nature, making nature their God. But nature does not care. It doesn't have the capacity. It just is. Now, the Christian worldview is in stark contrast to this. The Christian worldview gives us good news. It says that we are created in the image of God, the imago Dei. It says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. It says we are God's workmanship. God does not make junk. It says that we have been filled with value and meaning, designed with a purpose and destined for eternity. And in one of the greatest sentences ever written, it's known as one of the greatest sentences ever written. It comes from an author in North Africa, Augustine, the 4th century. In his Confessions, he said, "O Lord, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find its rest in you." You see, God is not just our origin, He is our destination, but He's also the way to our destination. God has made us towards Himself, like arrows moving towards a target or a homing pigeon flying home. You see, ideas have consequences, and if you teach people they are animals, don't be surprised if they start acting like they're animals. There's a few points before we get into the evidence for science, for the existence of God, that I just want to make to you. In the scientific academia, in the universities out there, in our schools, what they can't seem to get across is the difference between the mechanism and the mechanic. You see, does anyone know who invented the light bulb? Thomas Edison. Exactly. So when you look at a light bulb and we discover the process of electricity, so we discover how a light bulb actually works, does that mean that the light bulb did not need Thomas Edison? You needed both. You needed both the mechanism and the mechanic. You need both the engineering process and the engineer. You need both the design and the designer. So science helps us to understand the mechanism. It helps us to understand the process of engineering, the actual design that's going on. But they want to exclude the mechanic, the engineer, and the grand designer. The same with the Model T Ford. You needed Henry Ford for that. But we understand the process of mechanical engineering. So that's the first limitation of science. And that's what they are trying to exclude. The second point I want to make is this famous quote by Bertrand Russell. Now, Bertrand Russell was a famous logician, famous philosopher. If you go to McMaster University, you see some of his archives there. Very famous atheist. And he said this wonderful statement, "What science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know." Now, if you look at that statement, Bertrand Russell's logic just goes out the window there. What science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know, that is not a statement of science. Can I take that to the scientific laboratory? Can I conduct a scientific experiment on that? So if it's true, it's actually false. It's a self-refuting statement. But this is what we are actually being forced to believe. Science cannot even answer even the simplest questions in life. How do I know that my son loves me? Do I send him for a CT scan, an MRI scan, a PET scan? Do I see the different parts of his brain highlighted underneath the scan? No. I don't send him to a laboratory to have him tested to know that he loves me. So science cannot even answer the simplest questions in life. So it has limitations. And the next point I want to make to you is there's something called a naturalistic filter. I hope you all know what filters are. Some of you like filtered coffee. So in the academic world, when we look at scientific data, right, uh, we apply a certain lens using the scientific method. Now, science tells us a lot about the process, about how things work, and that's fair enough. But when you come to non-repeating events in history, the scientific method cannot apply because you cannot repeat those events. So we apply something called inference to the best explanation. We try and get the best explanation from that. And this is particularly true when it comes to origins, right? But what the scientists in the universities want to do is they want to apply a filter to those specific questions about origins. What do I mean by a filter? They, instead of science being in search of truth and the most truthful answer, science changes its goal to what is the best naturalistic answer. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm just trying to make this point. They put a filter above all the data. So when we're looking at the evidence, right, we are looking at the evidence, trying to analyze the data. There's only one answer that's acceptable, and that's an answer that does not involve a designer. So you look at the evidence, even if the best answer is a designer for that, it's not allowed. It's not allowed. You cannot say that God did that. Or God is the best explanation for this data. You will lose your job in the scientific world. Your papers will not get published. And this is what's happening to people in the scientific community. They look at the data and they say, hey, this looks like design. But they're not allowed to publish it because the only thing that's acceptable is a naturalistic answer. And that is an important thing whenever you read any scientific article. Even though it's not the best explanation for the data or not the truthful one, it's the only explanation that is allowed. So there's a myth out there that science has made God a myth. And very often, you as young people on the universities may get this thrown to you. So I want to give you a way to actually initially respond to that, and I want you to practice your dumb's face. When somebody says, hey, you know what, science has made God a myth. So you practice your dumb's face, and you say, that I would have actually put a picture of my dumbest face, but my wife said I must not give you a divine revelation of hell. So the question is, there's two people having a conversation. One is making a claim that science has no place for God, or that science has shown that God does not exist. You are the one listening to that conversation. So, like all Christians, you want to take your Bible, like me, and you just want to hit them on the head with a Bible verse. But I just want you to stop before you do that and practice your dumbest face, because you see, they have made the claim. The person making the claim or making the statement has the burden to provide the evidence to justify that claim. And so often we just go ahead with our Bible and just want to hit them on the head with a Bible verse, but they're the one making the claim, so let them sweat a bit. Let them try and provide evidence. So what you do is you say, why? Oh, why has science made God a myth? I'd love to know that. Or how has science made God a myth? You see, and very often it will be followed by an awkward silence. At best, they will say, oh, maybe the Big Bang has made God a myth. And then we'll get to the Big Bang a bit later, but a Big Bang requires a Big Banger. Maybe they say, oh, evolution makes God a myth. And it leaves no place for God. Really? Why? How? God could have designed evolution. God could have set the process in motion. God could have guided it along the way till we come there. So your argument, please tell me, how does evolution make God a myth? And we'll get a little bit more to evolution. And I don't want you just to go and baptize Charles Darwin just yet. Okay? Because I'm not saying evolution is true, don't get me wrong. And before you start teaching the doctrine of from goo to you by way of the zoo in your Sunday school classes, there are serious scientific problems with the theory of evolution, and hopefully we'll get towards that towards the end. But I am now going to go and talk about, I'm going to put myself on the spot. Because you see, I'm not going to say science has made God a myth. I'm actually going to say science has made atheism extinct. And so the burden of proof is on me. So I'm going to provide some arguments on why I think that atheism actually should be extinct, but is not. So, the first point I want to make is, it's called the cosmological argument, and it deals with the Big Bang. So, before the 1920s, scientists in the scientific community believed that the universe was eternal. Now, that had an advantage to them because it gave the universe endless amount of time for these molecules just to bump into each other, to start creating things, to start forming planets. And things sort of turned upon its head in the 1920s when there was really just a flurry of scientific discoveries that actually showed that the universe had a beginning. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the detail regarding this, just for the sake of time, but these are the scientific discoveries, and Edwin Hubble looked out at his telescope and saw that the universe was expanding, so he inferred from that there must have been a beginning. So like how you blow up a balloon, and if you think that these galaxies are little dots on the balloon, and as you blow a balloon, these galaxies move apart. This is what he saw looking through his telescope. And then Einstein, with his theory of general relativity, actually confirmed this in the mathematics. And then we use the second law of thermodynamics, which essentially says that the universe is running out of energy. So bad news, in a couple billion years, we may be no more. Everything may just stop in a sudden bang, because the universe is running out of energy, according to the second law of thermodynamics. And the real death knell was when Arno Penzias, he actually saw and he discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize for this in physics. And then famous, forget his name, Penrose and Hawking worked on the singularity theorem, and they discovered that at point zero, at t equals 0, that there was nothing. So the conclusions that we get from science is pretty remarkable. The universe had a beginning. So what this means is that time, space, and matter, everything that existed, has a beginning. And this beginning was at an expansion event. It wasn't really a bang. The Big Bang was actually a mocking term that was used just to, because the scientists did not want the universe to have a beginning, so they mocked it and they called it Big Bang. But truth has its way of prevailing, and now this is the universal scientific theory that has been accepted. And we know from science that at point zero, it was a universe from nothing. So we need to follow the evidence where it leads. And this has resulted in an argument that has been revived. It was actually an argument that was based purely on reason in the past, called the Kalam cosmological argument. But now we have this cosmological argument based on science. So there are three statements. So if the first two are related, and they are true, it follows deductively that the conclusion is true. This is a deductive argument, so in logic we call this the highest form of reason. And it would be true. So point one, anything that began to exist must have been caused by something or someone. Does anyone have any problems believing that? We know this from everyday experience. It's called the law of causality. Something cannot exist from nothing. That the cause of every finite or limited thing is something outside of itself. We know this from science. We know this from day-to-day experience. Something cannot come from nothing. There has to be a cause. I challenge you to find me something that comes from nothing. And please, in the Q&A, if you have come up with that, we may write a paper together. So, premise two, statement two, we know the universe began to exist. That is a scientific fact. So conclusion is the universe must have been caused by something or someone. So, everyone follow me. This is such a beautiful argument and such a simple argument. So I just want you to get the grasp of this argument. What does it tell us about the cause of the universe? Well, the cause of the universe must be all-powerful. I mean, it created the universe. Whatever it was, or whatever it was all-powerful. It's transcendent. What do I mean by transcendent? It's outside or above, outside time. It's outside space. It's outside matter. So it's basically outside the universe. It must be eternal and timeless because it created time. It was outside time. It must be immaterial, meaning it cannot have matter. Because matter was created, we know. At t equals 0, matter was created. It must be one, because the laws on Pluto are the same laws, the physical laws that we have on Earth. It can't be many different competing things, because you'll have different physical laws on different planets, or different parts of the universe, or different galaxies. It must be personal, because it had a choice whether or not to create it, and it must be uncaused. Otherwise, you're just delaying your logic, who caused that, and then something caused that, and then to an absolute infinity. So it must be in cause. So, what do we know from science about this cause? This cause is all-powerful, transcendent, eternal, timeless, immaterial, one, personal, and uncaused. Let me put it to you this way. In the beginning was the cause. And this cause was all powerful, transcendent, eternal, timeless, immaterial, one, personal, uncaused. That's the first four letters of the Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, God. If you can believe the first few letters of the Bible, you should have no problem believing what comes after. Now, people have not been happy with this, especially the atheists, but what would they actually have us believe? They would have us believe that somehow a universe just popped out of nothing. Terry Pratchett, the famous author, says, "In the beginning was nothing, and this nothing exploded." Such faith to believe that only universes pop out of nothing. Why doesn't a green Lamborghini pop out of nothing? Or a flying pig pop out of nothing? William Lane Craig notes that even when you have a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat, you have the magician and the hat to start off with. So this is actually worse than magical thinking. Now, listen what Arno Penzias, the discoverer of the cosmic background radiation, actually says. The best data we have exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the Bible as a whole. And what the quote that I like is from Robert Jastrow, who was the head of the Goddard Institute in NASA. He said, "For the scientist who lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. If only the scientists decided to consult the theologians all these years ago, maybe they would have discovered that the universe has a beginning." So I think we'll just pause there for a stretch break before I continue. Or
Or you're going to continue the same?
I'm gonna continue.
Okay, you're fine to cut it now?
Yeah, just to have a break.